Hi everyone. Please excuse that I am not going to put myself on camera because it's easier for me to share more of myself, believe it or not, in this way. I know people like to look at me, and I will tell you a little bit about that here shortly of my experiment with myself that I've been doing. But I had to share because I know there's one side of me, and this is kind of what I love about Tantra and Eastern everything, is to go off and play and get outside of your head and just make it about fun and pleasure. And I do believe that, I'm pretty good at that. But sometimes there's a need for me to say things more deeper, which I used to do a lot more of in my other side of my work as the heartache helper, from the age of 30 on, that I have had all these wonderful experiences over decades and many gurus and teachers, but I didn't have some missing pieces of myself that made sense. And, with the world that we're living in right now, which I know is very hard to speak about for most people, of how that translates into their everyday life, myself included, how much we can sort of share without overburdening other people in our sphere of what they themselves might be going through. But I do feel that I have some valuable insights to share. And maybe I finally feel like I can because I'm of a certain age, whereas when you're younger, you might seem presumptuous to say such deep things. But one of the things I have learned, being autistic by definition is a completely different way of viewing the world. It is typically, especially the ADHD, this side of dualities, that you have the ability to, express and think about things very deeply. We feel shit deeply. This is something that my father was the same way. He was a poet. He was a different type of man. Even though he worked in a prison, he was such a sensitive guy. And I have that. He used to say to me, Farah, you have my heart, that heart where we don't look at the world like non-neurotypical people do, where they sort of can brush off and make it things black and white, and we're sensitive. And as a girl, you might even be labeled dramatic or too much of something when you feel things so deeply. And in fact, autistic people have an innate, incredible sense of justice, black and white thinking, to that point where everything is very clear, right or wrong. Which is why I probably gravitated to the messaging of Tantra at such a young age, because the very first law of Tantra is to let go of everything. It's the opposite spectrum of yoga, which you have to do in a certain way in a disciplined sort of formation. Tantra is the opposite. It's about expansion. It's about letting go of having to do everything perfectly, which was, for me at a young age, really important lesson for me to have, because I was raised, firstborn daughter of 4, from 2 equally autistic parents who had a very black and white way of seeing the world, who had very, very high expectations of me, of being perfect, of literally doing everything perfectly. And I did a really good job of that for a while, but there was things that had happened for me, in my childhood, that I did a very good job of hiding. Um, and I will briefly tell you this story only to give you relevance of understanding how this would affect an autistic child, where, and I joke, I was always entrepreneurial at a young age, around the age of, 7 or 8 or 9, I was that chatterbox kid, without knowing I was ADHD, knocking at everyone's doors, bugging them so I could see if I could make money, because I always had a business of sweeping, raking, shoveling snow, selling a muffin with orange juice, and figuring out a way to always make money, to the part where my parents would jokingly say that they would turn to me when they needed $20. And one day, my mother had a rule. I couldn't just go around the block unless I took a friend with me, for expanding my business parameter to the other block, and which the only kid that was free one particular day to go with me was a 17-year-old retarded girl or woman who had the mind of a 5-year-old that nearly every 7 or 8-year-old could manipulate to do what they wanted to do. And so I went to my last resort person that I knew was free and invited her to go sweeping and raking with me that day for money. She was very excited to tell me of a particular place we could go to where she had already gotten some candy. So, of course, I was all in. And we proceeded to go around the block. And she took me to this house that she had clearly been to before. And the person invited us inside and sat us both down on these white sheeted covering sofas. And he brought her upstairs somewhere, and I didn't know where he was taking her. I was all of 8 or 9 years old. I didn't understand what was happening. And then he brought me in the back and, um, you know, was proceeding to molest me. Somehow, and I really don't want to get too deep in the spirituality of this, but there was a spiritual moment that I was able to get out of that house, but this young woman was not. She was left behind. Many years later, we moved away to another town, and I never told my parents. I never told anybody what had happened. But I remember when we went back to visit my old landlord that she spoke about, this woman. Her name was Lisa, and how her parents didn't believe her when she said that she had this experience, and they thought she was going crazy because she was retarded, and they sent her away to this home for people, a mentally ill type of place. That's when it sparked the remembering of what had happened. I sat there in the background listening and couldn't believe that people were not believing her, because I knew she was telling the truth. I even knew that this place was literally in the back alley behind where we lived. I couldn't speak up, though, at the time. And for many years throughout my high school years, I carried this immense amount of guilt of knowing this woman was telling the truth. I felt immense guilt because I was the one that brought her out. It was about making money, and so I always felt a little guilty about that. And I wouldn't tell anybody. I do believe my need to get out and escape, to go to France at a young age, was a way to escape something else, think about something else. So at a very young age, my parents sort of laughed. They were not college educated at this time, and so for me to come home at 15 years old and say I want to go to school in France, my parents looked at me and say, ha ha, yeah, when you have the money, sure. And I, being that little entrepreneurial spirit, said, well, I'm going to go ahead and make that happen. And I worked 2 jobs, and a year later went to my parents and said, I have the money saved up, I still want to go to France. And my parents looked at each other and said, how did you do that? And I said, I worked hard. And so my father, I remember my earliest memories of, being driven to the airport to France at the age of 16 and a half, with my father beaming in the front car. He was a muscle car kind of guy. And my father was only 17 years older than me. So mind you, my parents were very young when they had me. 2 autistic individuals who probably gravitated towards each other, who thought the world, oh my God, our first daughter is going off to France, and my father was just so proud. And so, I would go off and start my journeys around the world at a very young age, but probably without realizing it, even though I was trying to meet everybody's expectations of what that would hold on me, which, high achieving, education, job opportunities, but I still had that entrepreneurial spirit. But then I think I felt guilty for it always when I was younger. I felt guilty to be happy and successful because there was someone in this world that I knew was not living the same life and deserved to be believed. I think, so, in some ways I sabotaged myself at a very young age when I decided to become a lingerie modeling. And my parents were wondering what the heck was going on with me. And I was kind of like in a fuck you attitude, I wanted to be free of this expectation that I had to be perfect. And so I had my own unique way of fucking up my early life. And then carried on in my 20s and 30s and 40s with just sort of expansion in my own way. I never did things in a traditional way. I think of that Tori Amos song I used to listen to in my early 20s. Cornflake Girl is the song, if you want to look it up, by Tori Amos. And the song goes something like this. I never was a cornflake girl. I used to hang with the raisin ones. This is the type of life I am. This is who I am. I never was one of these types of girls. I was a raisin girl. And that is exactly what I knew about myself at a very young age, that I wasn't quite, despite looks, going to be a cornflake girl. Now, when we talk about how to navigate a world with a disability you don't even know you have, especially in the areas of love and sex, there's a lot of good and bad experiences that will happen, especially if you look a certain way. I would say to many people out there, one of the biggest things that people may not understand about looks is how that doesn't necessarily give you a good, accurate portrayal of somebody if they do have a disability, or will even argue a personality disorder or any of the other mental illnesses, because looks can be deceiving and people do not often look at people and truly see who they are beyond just what they look like. And that's good and bad for both men and women. But I would say that many people would not understand, how deeply one who is autistic looks at love. In fact, there's a character portrayal of most autistic people that are, is now the DSM is starting to recognize as a certain type of persona, where they're highly empathetic and highly attuned to areas of justice, so sort of that black and white thinking. They're usually groomed to be great healers, listeners, empathetic people who also look at things outside of the box. That's the ADHD side, who don't, who can be punctual and orderly, but also crave novelty and spontaneity. And I think to myself, of course, it was so natural that I would gravitate towards the career that I'm in predominantly today, that I was always a seeker, but there was also this incredible sense that I feel the heaviness of all those that I meet and come across. It's like a sponge. You absorb so much. And, I remember, listening to Sarah McLachlan in my 20s, like ready to jump off a bridge. You feel everything, the pain of people, and especially for my parents who would eventually separate, and my father struggling as a prison guard at the same prison to which all these prison guards are beating the shit out of a black man in a prison, the same exact prison that just a few years ago. I think of my father, how he would have been so devastated by seeing that. I don't even picture him fitting in with a crowd like that. And I imagine that I lost much of my father's poetic soul working in a prison to provide for his 4 daughters and wife. The type of man who would write a poem every day of my entire life, or for my sisters and I, how that toll of emotional fragility somehow trickled down, where, one of the things that, he would say to me is, I work in a prison so that you don't have to be in a prison-like situation one day. That really stuck with me, because much of my life was all about avoiding the typical expectations that you follow a certain path that's always safe and predictable. Prison can be many different things, including that of our own mind or relationships we have. And so in every scenario, with every person I ever met, gurus, teachers, lovers, friends, I would see, am I in a prison? Am I seeing things clearly? Is someone trapped? How would I get out of the prison? In fact, I use an analogy with many of the people I've seen throughout 20 or 30 years now, of the mind as a prison guard and the soul, the body, the prisoner. They're buddies. They hang out every day. One day, the soul, the body, asked the prison guard, hey, I want to get out of here. And the prison guard, aka your mind, says, oh, how dare you think that you deserve to be out of there? You can go in the playground over here. You can do this. You can do that. You can have that relationship. You can do this kind of job. And if the soul isn't really in tune with themselves to realize it's a trick, they will say, well, no, I would rather want my freedom. Many people, whether they realize it or not, their souls, their bodies, their lives are just an example of what type of prison they're in and what type of prison guard they have. And when I meet people, I always realize I'm meeting the prison guard first. It is sometimes a big, bad, burly person who doesn't allow them to feel good or, feel free or expansive or open-minded. And then sometimes it's ones that are really like, hey, I could leave that door wide open and that motherfucker will never leave this place, because they believe that they were so bad they deserve to be here. They deserve to remain in a prison. My job, as I go in as a Dakini, is to simply reach the soul in time to say, let's plan your exit plan. If you really want to get out, we have to bypass the mind. And that's much of what I do. Now, I like to jokingly say that God has a sense of humor too, and says, well, I'm good at marketing too, Farah. And they just happen to use my looks and all of that for that. But in the end, I'm always keenly aware that much of what I see, like a man, like my father, is when you work in a prison day in and day out, you're seeing the worst of the worst, and it will break your heart. There's a toll for that. There's a price for that. I pay the price for that. Even though others in society will never, ever understand, well, you're not a prisoner. You're not, prison guard. What are you talking about? but anybody who helps people in environments that are considered controversially, not acceptable, or black and white thinking about the world and how people even land where they are. People just not even understanding they had a disability to begin with, because many people literally in their lives might be a prisoner in a prison, type of prison, a relationship or a job, that because they had a disability and they didn't even know it. And so we're still catching up to making sure that we understand people, which is giving me only more compassion, which is what I like about Buddhism. I laugh. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm a Christian, or I would say more of a universalist kind of person, where I think about all religions as having some relevancy. But the one thing I appreciate about the Buddhist is this idea of compassion, that somehow we are all at different states of our development, our mind, our souls. And that I have often, when I work on people's bodies, I have a very unique process. I don't like to talk about it because it doesn't sound sexy, but it's a real genuine process that's going to only help your sexual life if you have a sexual chakra that's clear. But the process is one in which you recognize that the whole body has carried like a prison guard experience. It tells me what type of prison you've been in, what are the conditions, what are your limitations, where do you get to play, how much is stored, how much do you carry? Are you a warrior soul, an older soul that's here helping others? Are you a younger soul trying to figure out how you can meet the souls? I mean, to me, I don't really look at bodies or body parts the same as others might. One of the trainings that I've had is to read it like a story. And in my younger years, I wanted to be a writer. And so for me, working on bodies or working with souls was sort of an undercover assignment, whether they realized it or not. I got the crux of the story before everyone else got it. And then I could rewrite the story in my own unique way, with a creative way of getting them out of that prison if they so decided they wanted to escape. Some people I would see, and they did get away. And others didn't even realize they were in a prison and kept going back in over and over and over again, repeating the same mistakes, maybe in multiple relationships, maybe in multiple jobs. Maybe they just never even realized. They kind of feel like they're safer in the prison. It's clear, it's easier. I just know the rules and I follow along and I can kind of get the job done. But one of the things I always loved about Tantra or Eastern anything is to be conscious that we are, in a sense, above ourselves in this life story, interconnected, and that you have a say or a choice. One of the things that there's so many different things that will tickle your mind in this lifetime, of things that you can do to intellectually grow, expand your, skills. I mean, especially in the world of AI, everybody's thinking you've got it, you're never good enough. You never can be satisfied at whatever place you've ever arrived. It's kind of the common denominators. Like the prison will always be there because there will always be something that you need to get better at, improve at, skill-wise understand better. You have to look better. You have to, you can't even have pleasure in eating anymore. You have to starve yourselves. You have to fast. I mean, it's literally everything is about some sort of constraint or discipline that you are never allowed to be at peace. It's sort of the trick of the game. But one of the things I think the tantrics are really good at is recognizing that, well, to balance that, you have this other side of who you are, which is through your body, through pleasure, through, expressions, creativity, spontaneity, sensuality. This word of sensuality is not used enough because there's obviously sex and then there's like a magic sauce to it. I think of like all the movies my mother used to make me watch when I was in high school, of all these British movies, like a lot of Ray Fine movies, and it was always, Pride and Prejudice, and it's like this sensuality, the stares between Mr. Darby and Keira Knightley's character, and this love feeling that many people have forgotten still exist, if only they had stopped long enough to look at the world around them. This is why during these times I have been more and more silent in my expressions of sharing. Because when you are going through and seeing so many things that take away humanity, you are purposefully being visually attacked. You don't see the forces that are there because they look like other humans. You don't realize that your skills, to which you need to bypass the shitstorm of the reality of what you see as black and white concrete 3D realization, that there's another place beyond that place, and it lives in your body and it lives in your consciousness in the form of energy, chi, but also a creative switchboard. You have like a station, like, a producer station. You go in and you move the knobs and you can get a different sound. You hear a bass line, but you have the ability to make it a beautiful symphony, or you make it hell, however you use the switchboard of you. And so many people sort of are stagnant. What I see is that they don't really see that they have this ability through their body, through exercises, through practices, through knowledge, to actually alter their experiences, perception of the experience, and connectiveness, and to bypass that prison guard mind trick to experiencing bliss. This ability to feel good even in the midst of all that is going on around us, or to find the blissful moments throughout the day, or to find the blissful things about each person who may be very imperfect and struggling in their own way. But how do you find the bliss in them too? Because if you don't have the ability to have compassion and understanding that it's always fluctuating, nothing stays the same, including people. Even relationships won't stay the same. Where you live, what you do, nothing is meant to stay the same. But the ability to enjoy the blissful aspects of that really come from a connectiveness of recognizing which parts of your life are a trick that you have zero control over, and which parts are intentional that you do have everything in control of. And the positive message that I want to give is that the good news is you actually have 1,000% control over every moment you're experiencing right now and how this plays out. Because of course your mind, the prison guard, will want to keep you in that prison and maybe even convince you that you deserve to be in one. But then I believe there's something else to the soul, the spirit, our chi, our sense of who we really are, that wants to express itself however it can. It might be through art, it might be through your work, it might be through your parenting, it might be through a talent you have or helping others. And I even believe the most powerful one of all is how you love and display that love, both physically and sexually. When I look around and see all of this manosphere stuff, the Andrew Tate stuff, the bickering that people spend all day long attacking someone, attacking a side, making a negative comment, I'd say, oh my God, look at that one. They fell for the trick. They're so good at falling. I mean, look at those. They're beautifully. Look at if that person had only applied all that energy into self-awareness and self-love and loving others, then like they would have been a powerhouse. And I think of Candace Owens. I think how much she talks about this one and that one and this one. So that bitch, if she had only just pointed that towards helping people, truly, like we've got like animals going extinct, and we've got like people dying, and we've got children that are traumatized, and we've got people in Africa that are, being forgotten and eliminated, and we got people in, discrimination, and it just the poor that are the children in this country like starving at lunch. I mean, if these people had spent even like 1/10 of that energy and time and consideration towards real problems of the world, this world would be looking completely different. But then again, ego is a wonderful type of prison guard, isn't it? And for a lot of people, they never get out of that state. That's the other example of when I say really good lovers, you can tell who they are because they are so busy loving and enjoying being in love and feeling love that they don't really give a shit about that kind of stuff. They're not spending their days twittering. They're not spending their days fighting over this cause or that cause. They're just so busy loving that they're having a good time, and every day is a good day. In fact, I saw something on the news yesterday about this, and I'm like 8 years behind social media sensations, where it was like Kai, the helper, the homeless guy named Kai, who took a hatchet and helped save 2 women from a terrible guy. And then they were like infatuated with this guy. He was kind of perceived as being crazy. He was on Jimmy Kimmel and did all these incredible things, but he was like this really incredible free-spirited man who was living his best life as a homeless man, a young guy, young kid. And he was like a talented musician and all this. I mean, it was phenomenal. I was watching this. I said, this is an example. To me, there was an angel on this earth in life. And it was almost like a lesson to be taught. I think it's something you can watch on Netflix, the special of Kai. But it was an example of how I believe, oh my God, thank you for showing me a reminder of angels or beings or guides that come in literally in our lifetime to show us, remind us of the crazy absurdness of being free, however that looks. And you'll see this sometimes in children that are dying of cancer, or you see this in people who have lived through wars, and they come out in this incredible attitude, and you're like, how does that person have that attitude when, like, I'm over here, like, my life is like this and that, and I feel awful. And it's a reminder of these little things that you're supposed to be enjoying your life, not just explaining the life or evaluating your life. One of the things that I think is the most underrated skill set is whether you can help other people through the way you love them to actually let go of life and be in the moment of just loving. That there's not an agenda that they have to, when people get together now and they have a relationship or they go on a date, it's like they need to, like, figure out the whole ending of the story, and there's, like, no fun in that. Even when people ask me the question, can you tell me from minute to beginning to the end what's going to happen? And I kind of feel like that, like, loses the whole point. The whole point is to go into something you don't know what's going to happen and to still be free and okay with that. Because, like, how many things in life can you go and enjoy where you don't already know what's going to happen by the end? I mean, there's so few things that are left to be spontaneous in, to be in the moment in, to have no idea what would happen. Why would you want to kill the buzz in this moment? But I think in everyday relationships, people's expectations, their nervousness of not knowing what's coming around the corner, perhaps that's the leftover remnants of a terrible prison experience of your soul, of your life, being trapped with that prison guard who really did make things so terribly hard that you cannot imagine breaking free. Because if you did, and you actually enjoyed it, you would be feeling even worse to be reminded of how many years you passed letting life be a different way. I just wanted to mention this because when I feel so much, and I do, believe me, I'm sensitive. I feel so much. And I'm trying really hard to be, my practice is being present every day with a child growing up. And one of the biggest gifts that this job has given me is the ability to spend as much time with my child as I get to spend. Because I knew when I gave birth in this child alone, and his father would come over and I would bring him over, but he couldn't hack it but a week and went back. I knew that this child only has one parent, and he better get most of me because he won't make it in this country if he doesn't have somebody there doing it with him. But one of the things I'm so proud of is being conscious of what I wanted skill sets wise for him to have. Empathy, compassion, self-awareness, appreciation for simple things, appreciation of beauty, gratitude, constantly pursuing something, nature connection, bettering oneself. And to do this with somebody is like the biggest gift because, if you meet a partner who can do that, that's great. But most people, and this is what I believe is the stem of what I was talking about in yesterday's little chat, is most people didn't have a safe attachment growing up, one in which allowed them to truly be free and safe as children to then believe in positivity of safe attachments to adults. And sometimes people like myself who didn't have always a safe attachment either got it through gurus and teachers along the way or lovers, and people that you meet that you do get that with. And I feel like that sometimes people don't find those people in their dating, and that's when it's time to seek a guru or a teacher. And that may come in the form of a hired guru, goddess. It might come in the form of, people. What I often think is not spoken about enough in this industry is it's not really always about the sex only. Of course, everybody makes it about that, but really it is also for people who often don't feel the connection and need to practice that or want to remember that or want to experience it and fit that in their life. And I think there's something to be said, a lot of credit to be given to people who actually take the initiative to do something with that, because so many people flutter away and die silently sitting in that prison cell with no idea of how or when they particularly got there, what offense led them there, why they keep listening to their mind tell them they should stay there and do things a certain way. Many people never fight for their freedom. And yet I believe most of the people that make their way to me do. They may not have completely figured out a way to break free and truly feel blissful in their life, to appreciate, like the Buddhists do, that being a human has a lot of perks. And this is the best stage to be in. Of all the stages as a Buddhist, you could have been a hungry ghost. You could have been, a god. You could have been, in hell realm. You're a human. You're actually aware in this lifetime of what you can be doing in this lifetime to get to the next level. That's pretty exciting stuff. And even just being aware that how many amazing things, miracles happening in our bodies every day, how many souls we have the capacity to come across in a day, the connectiveness of it all sometimes is so overpowering for me to feel that. How I could be in a movie theater and I notice somebody sitting and I feel that person's energy. I just do. And I've always been like that type of person who draws people in, not through being the loudest one or not trying to be, showing and grabbing people's attention, but there is some power in attraction, in the right kind of energy with silence and being present. And that is something that I don't think is talked about. And I really have a hard time with social media. I really, really do, because I think most of it is all like a performance. It doesn't seem genuine. And I have a hard time with that, because I don't think the most sacred things in the world should be commercialized or somehow wrapped up in a 30-second reel. Depth and sincerity is something like a secret sauce, a spice. If you give it away, no one appreciates the uniqueness of the sauce, right? It's something that has to be dosed in certain ways, experienced with the high reverence of the value of it. And I think in social media, a lot of that is lost. And that's why people, even despite having access to so many different lectures and lessons and talking and this and that, they just come across feeling less. That's what I loved about these Eastern arts as well, is there's a mystery, a sacredness. It wasn't meant to be spill your secrets about every little thing that you know and put it out there for the whole world to hear it. Only those that sought the knowledge would make it to the top of the mountain and figure out which cave was the Dakini and where she was waiting. It was meant to be something that was revered, not something that was just shared with anybody, because not everybody's ready for it. Even if it's exposed to them, they're not always ready. It lands differently when you are ready. And that's what is really important, because it can change in a moment your entire life trajectory when you were ready for that moment when it came. And you have to be aware. And I think that what does it take to be ready in that moment? It takes to say, I recognize my mind as a prison guard, and I recognize my soul, the body, is here in this prison. But the moment that I realize I don't want to be in a prison, I want to be free, and I want to feel things, not under the conditions of which my mind allows me to feel them, but I really want to be free. And that I know that if I leave, that I will be okay, because I know that the universe is here as a safe attachment. Flowers are here for me. The world is here for me. Nature is here for me. There are beings that are here for me, rooting for me. Even if I don't have the perfect love, and even if I don't have the perfect family, and even if I don't come from the perfect color of my skin, or the perfect place that I was born, or the perfect salary, I am still so loved that I am here in this moment, worthy to experience that with another human being or many human beings. That is a really wonderful feeling to come out and see on the other side. And I just sometimes want to remind people of that there is so much goodness that is still meant to be experienced in this life, even despite imagery, an attack. You're under attack. To swallow up any possible thought that you could finally be free and feel good. Just being yourself. Just you. And so thank you for letting me share this. I rarely have moments uninterrupted with my child. He is off seeing a second movie with his friends. And I spend a lot of time alone afterwards processing as a neurodivergent. That's how we recalibrate our nervous systems. We spend time alone. I look at beautiful art. I used to have, by the way, my dogs and my cats. And I really have struggled for the last few months in deep, deep grief. I made a rash decision one night when my son was overwhelmed by the umpteenth time one of our dogs, who was epileptic, was having seizures, sometimes 3 to 5 times in the middle of the night. I would get up, I'd clean the crate, the pee, the urine, everything, walk the dog, go back to bed, get up. And I was doing that for almost a year, almost every night. My sleep was being disrupted. My son was becoming dysregulated. And I made a call. The place we lived at was trying to overcharge us $150 a week for the pets. And I was just getting to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted my son to calm down. I wanted to sleep, a good night's sleep. And I probably should have just let go of the one dog, but I couldn't make that choice. My mind, I couldn't choose between them which one I would let go. And so I let them all go, thinking that they would all be adopted. But I look back now and I hadn't realized that for me, animals have always been my connecting thing. And so I have been deeply grieving. Some nights I just cry, missing them. Because when my son would go, in my job up until just a few years ago, my son would go with his babysitters and live with them half the week so that I had the flexibility to work 3 nights a week. He would be with the sitter, stay overnight, normal schedule, and then he would come back and I would homeschool and be with him. So when my son would go away and I would really, really miss my baby, those dogs of mine and the cats of mine would curl up with me, kissing me, loving me, and just being that energy, you know. And so missing them, I feel like I have betrayed that. I want to look at it like I made the right decision, but I have been in mourning. So if I haven't been as, I don't know, social media blobbing as usual, then that would explain it, because I think of those animals as they were my other kids, and I never got to have other kids, even though I wanted to, for a different love story that I will share one day from a man that I waited for 10 years in Algeria. And so the animals were my substitute children, and I've been in mourning for them. But it's a reminder of how great that we can love. And they stay with me. I know that I was, animals. I go out and I'm thinking of getting a squirrel box. My new thing now is watching squirrels in boxes at night with cameras. And I had some squirrels at one point in a tree window that I used to have. People probably visited me in this window, and there was this huge tree, and the squirrels would come up, and I knew they were connected to me, but seeing them up close has really brought me joy. How connected we are. Birds, we go and see the fish and they just happen to be right there hanging out. I really believe that if we stop just long enough to notice how loved we are by everything in the universe is all around, it's like a shower of love in your face every day. You have to seek out the beauty in this lifetime, because life in the other side is always seeking to not have you advance to the next level of understanding. And love is not only happening between another human being and you, it is possible to happen with all things in this universe and you. And so I wanted to say that message today, because I feel that sometimes the dooming and glooming, which we're all guilty of doing at times, needs to be balanced with the reality check of, well, you are here living this life, and goddamn, you got a beautiful world to look at. People all around you having their own struggles is the common denominator. And so next time you're out there, try to just connect. Namaste.